Hey everybody, welcome back. So I decided I wanted to print new gear shift knobs handles for my old Jeep CJ7, and I was going to make a video on that, but I ran into a slight problem. And the reason I'm printing gear shift knobs or handles is because I've got a newer model transmission with the original year transfer case, and it's impossible to get matching knobs that have the correct inscriptions on them. So I decided to print them, and I want text on them. And if you remember back to my video where I made the dashboard badges, and I'll put a link above, the dashboard badges for the wiper, washer, heat knobs, I used my Getek A10M dual filament printer to print most of the way up in white, and then I printed the text in black, and it turned out pretty good, although I did think the text could have been better. Of course, I did that in a version of Cura 4, probably 4.1.2 or 1.3, but now I'm having a problem with that version of Cura, that it is not stable in Windows 11. Sometimes it works, sometimes every time I try and load a model, it crashes back to the desktop. And so I noticed Cura 5 is out. And sometimes Cura will work, and Cura 4.1.3 will work, and sometimes it doesn't. And of course I've got PrusaSlicer and IdeaMaker, and somebody recommended I try SuperSlicer, so that's installed too. And I also have the slicers I use for the resin printer installed. So my first print was this, and I printed the whole thing, the whole shift handle right here, and the text turned out horrible. It actually turned out so bad I scraped it off, hoping I could at least use this for a test piece, or in case I decide I don't want text on it. But you know what? Then I thought, well, let's take this model. Here, I'll show you the model right now.
So here's my part in Fusion 360. And this was my first idea, was this. And just to write trans on one and T-case on the other. And I got to thinking about having it in set like that and how that was going to look. I like that idea, but for me to change the color at the base of this text means those layers of outside around it is going to be changed too. And what if somebody like my wife got into it and needed to drive it? Wouldn't it be nice if she had some idea what the shift pattern was? So then I decided on this. This will allow me to have the entire shift handle one color and the text just another. Now, I've got a couple of changes after this, but right now this is the one I started out with. So I printed it and I showed it to you, and let's switch back to it.
So that was this piece here, and while it printed for the most part pretty nice, and it's nice and solid, and I got a nice hole, a beefed up hole back there where I can put a threaded insert in, whichever style I decide to go with. The text was awful. And I mean, it was awful in a couple of ways. One, it was almost unreadable, and two, the printer somehow managed to find some black filament in it, and I think it was black PETG. The rest of this is PLA+. And even though I purged a couple 100 millimeters of filament through both sides, it still found some black right at the first layer of text, and since it was PETG, it didn't adhere, so nothing about that was right. Even the letters that printed okay were nearly unreadable. Now, as you may have noticed from that picture, I'm using a stencil type font. I believe it's called Black Ops, and I really like the look of it. I've used it before on larger text and it works good, but I thought, well, maybe, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's print something small. So I printed this. I mean, look at that. Look how good that turned out. I mean, it's incredibly good. So I thought, well, wait a minute. If I can do this good, why did this turn out so crappy? And I thought, before I spend another 6 or 8 hours printing another one of these, let's start doing some tests. Now, first thing I did was I went back to my part. I put my part in the mesh mixer because honestly I do not like the mesh tools in Fusion 360. I'm sure they'll get better. And I cut myself a smaller piece of that out so I could just see what the text was going to look like here. And I also thought, since I have all these different slicers, and you guys may remember I already did a top layer slicer shootout a while back, link above. And because I was having problems with Cura leaving gaps in the top. So I thought, well, you know what? Since I now have Cura 4.1.3 and the beta of Cura 5, I forget what the number is. I have the latest version of PrusaSlicer, the latest version of SuperSlicer, and the latest version of IdeaMaker. Let's give them all a try. And honestly, for those who still want to bring up Simplify 3D to me, I'd love to test Simplify 3D. I've reached out to them a couple times. My little channel here with 4,000 or 5,000 subscribers does not have the clout for them to send me an evaluation version. The one time they bothered responding to me, they said, just buy it and you have a week or two or 30 days or whatever to get your money back. And I said, yeah, no thanks. And that was the end of that, and I've never worked. I used to have a buddy who lived down the road from me who had it, and every now and again I'd run down and slice something on his, but he doesn't live here anymore, so we're not doing that. So I printed out these. These go with, these are my first test, and I've put on the bottom what slicers I've used. And in no particular order, let's take a look at them. And this one is IdeaMaker. And if you notice, IdeaMaker printed the text halfway decently, but man, the top layer of that thing is incredibly nasty at the base of the text. I mean, it's awful looking, but it may have done the best job of the text of any of them. So let's set that down. This one is PrusaSlicer, and its text does not look as good as IdeaMaker, but it's done a beautiful job of the top surface. Now, one thing I do want to mention is I have made these slicers, the settings in them, as close to each other as possible as far as layer height, line width. I'm using, I'm using a 0.3 layer height, a 0.45 line width. And the temperatures and fans are all set to the same. I'm not using any fancy adjustments to try and make the top surface super nice, because to be honest, the only one I really have a lot of experience with that is Cura, and not Cura 5, because Cura 5 has a completely new slicer engine, and I have no idea how it's going to react to any of the settings that I've gotten used to in the previous versions of Cura. So I haven't wanted to tweak a lot of that because I'm really good at it in Cura and not really good at it in anything else, although I'm getting a bit more experience in PrusaSlicer. So anyway, that being said, this was PrusaSlicer. This one here is SuperSlicer, and SuperSlicer seems to have the worst of all of it. It's got a crappy top layer and crappy text. Not sure why, but there it is. This is Cura 4, and Cura 4 actually isn't too bad. The top surface is pretty decent, and the text is pretty decent. It's not, I mean, it's not anywhere near as good as this, though. Look at that. This is perfect. I mean, the stencil font, it's separated. You can see all the way down to the white in through the stencil and open areas. I don't understand why this shouldn't be as good. And I'll be honest with you, I can't remember what I sliced this in. I know now, but at the time I was doing all this, I couldn't remember. I was having trouble keeping Cura 4 running, and I had Cura 5 and all the other slicers on it that I was messing around with, so I couldn't remember. Oh, and something else I want to note too is that I'm loading the G-code from these into a program called G-Code Mixmaster to get the layer change, the color change set right. And I'm doing that just because it's way easier to do in that than it is on the front panel of the printer. So that's how I got the color change, and then look at that, that's perfect. I can't believe it. So this is Cura 5, and Cura 5 is complete crap. It looks awful. The text looks awful. The top layer isn't bad. It's got a lot of artifacting around it. I'm just not sure. So then it dawned on me that, you know, this text size was 9mm and this text size was 5. Maybe the nozzle is just too coarse to do this stencil font that size. So I went back into my model and I decided, let's see how big I can make the text. So I found that not only could I make it 9, I could make it 10. So I did that, and I changed it on my model, and then once again I took it over to Mesh Mixer and I took a slice out of it, and I printed it. And I printed it in Cura 5. And this is what it looks like. And it's a lot better. But still, look at this one. I mean, it's better, but this is actually slightly smaller, and it's way nicer. I mean, it's way nicer. Now, I could take some sandpaper, I could take a sanding block and a razor knife, and I could make this acceptable. I want to know how this got this good. And so I figured I've still got the code right out of G-Code Mixmaster that made this. So I could look at that and I could see what I printed this in. And I'm going to, but I thought before I do that, wouldn't it be fun to get this original STL, put it in all, what I got, 5 slicers, put it in all 5 slicers, and see what they spit out and see which one most closely matches it. So let's start off with Cura 4. This is the one I printed in Cura 4, and I'm going to keep the control here. And I did these in the reverse colors so that I would know which one was anyway. Cura 4 sucks. Here I got my big gaps in it again, and if you remember before my shootout that I mentioned already, I had a top layer shootout, and difficulty with Cura getting cracks in the top layers. Well, there it is again. That's one of my all-time problems with Cura, is giant cracks in the top layers. And I can tweak it out, but it takes quite a few tweaks, and every now and again it'll still raise its ugly head, and none of those tweaks are in this one. Not only that, but the text looks like crap too. It's crap. It really is. Sorry, Cura, but there are some things you do very well and some things you do poorly, and top layers are one of the things you do very poorly. I'll put a link above. If I haven't already, I'll put a link above to my top layer shootout and my problem with the skins, the cracks above here in Cura as well. So what about Cura 5? Cura 5 uses Cura 5 is a beta, remember. Cura 5 uses a brand new slicer engine called the Arachne engine. So what does it look like? Here it is. This is the one out of Cura 5. It's better, but look at it. I've still got a crack in the top layer. I don't know if you can see it down this edge. I can't imagine what's going on with Cura that they can't close their top layers up better than that when every other slicer in creation that I've used does not have that issue. But there it is. The text is better, but the cracks in the top layer, you know, I'm on the verge of being done with Cura if they haven't solved that in version 5. So anyway, what do we got next to try? Let's try IdeaMaker. Here's the one out of IdeaMaker. I am for IdeaMaker. It's better, the top layer, while rough, and I'm not sure why IdeaMaker makes their top layer so rough when the other slicers don't, but it always has for me. Even with the same line width and everything else going on, their top layers are coarse. They're solid and they're fine, but they're coarse looking. Sometimes it actually looks pretty good, but most of the time I don't want it. Also note, ironing is not turned on in any of these. And the text, while not bad, ain't great. I mean, I could clean it up and make it acceptable, but you know what? This one, I don't have to. It looks great just the way it is. I want to be able to do this again. So, what's next? Let's look at PrusaSlicer. PrusaSlicer, if you don't know it, there it is there. This is the one out of PrusaSlicer. PrusaSlicer is made off the old slicer called Slicer with like a 3 instead of an E. Anyway, here's the PrusaSlicer one. Guess what? That's it right there. That is this one. Like I say, I still have the code that I created this one out of, the G-code. So I loaded in the notepad after this, and I looked, and I did print this one in PrusaSlicer. Now, it went in the G-code Mixmaster for the color change code to be inserted, but other than that, this is PrusaSlicer, and so is this, and that is it. And this is what I want. This is the answer. So here's an interesting thing. I find PrusaSlicer kind of, I don't know what the word, cryptic, maybe might be a good word to use. Every time I think I have some of its settings figured out, I try it again and I don't. So SuperSlicer is based off PrusaSlicer, so Here's the one I did in SuperSlicer. Let's compare it. And I gotta tell you, it's close, but it is not as good. It just is not as good. Let's get rid of my control. There's PrusaSlicer on the left and SuperSlicer on the right. It's good. Again, with a knife and a little bit of sanding, I could certainly make that work, but it is not as good. Interesting, isn't it? PrusaSlicer does this better than any others. Look at the top layer. The top layer at the base of the text is extremely smooth. It's well filled in. There's no gaps, no cracks. Wow. I mean, I'm very, very, very impressed. So here's what I want to do. I'm going to make another one of these. I'm going to keep my text big. I'm going to make another one of these. I printed this one in Cura 5, which we've already figured out is not the best for this. And I'm going to print some more of these. And again, I'm going to give them all a fair shot. So I'm going to print all of these. I'm going to print one of these in every slicer that I have here, all 5 of them. Now, if you're wondering why I switched colors, rotated the colors back, these are both PLA Plus products. One is from Everyone and one is from IdeaMaker, I think. IdeaMaker, yeah. And I've got way more of the orange than I have of the white. So that's one of the reasons why I switched, was not to get rid of all my white. Also kind of try and keep the first batches from the second batches separate. So I'm going to do that next, and let's come back and look at all of them. Let's give them all a fair shake. Now, another thing I want to know is if PrusaSlicer can do this and this, why did it do this? Is it just the difference in the size of the text, or is it the fact that there is more than one raised numeral and it has to move between them and I got a little oozing? Is that what caused the issue, or is it mainly just the size? And also, this text here was only raised 2 millimeter, where the text on these was raised 3. Is that an issue? I don't know, but I want to find out. What I'm thinking about doing is and I think I already did. Yeah, I already did on this one. I raised the text to 3 millimeter, but I thinned out and lowered the dashes, and I kept them at 2 millimeters. So hopefully that will control our oozing between the different raised numbers. So let's do some more printing now, and let's do one of these in all of them. I've already got the one from Cura 5. Okay, so I got these printed up. Let's just take a quick look at them. And I've tried to put them in order of Cura 4, Cura 5, IdeaMaker, SuperSlicer, and PrusaSlicer among all of them. So since I know the PrusaSlicer is my control, let's take a look at these last ones I printed with the larger font and the adjustments. This is Cura 4. It's not horrible, but if you look at it compared to my control, it's just, well, while it isn't bad, I don't want to call it bad. It actually is pretty decent, but it'd take a little bit of cleanup to make it look good. This is Cura, the beta of Cura 5, and honestly, I'm not sure I think that's better than Cura 4. I actually think Cura 4 might be as good or better. But it is a beta, and you know, sometimes betas aren't as good as the final product will be, so let's not judge it. This is IdeaMaker, and once again in IdeaMaker we have pretty decent text, but just the quality of the top layer is pretty awful. This is going to be SuperSlicer, and I imported my PrusaSlicer profiles into SuperSlicer, so they are identical. And you know, again, it's not bad. They all printed these larger text pretty decently, but I really kind of want this on all of them. And then PrusaSlicer. So that's the comparison between those. Okay, so the plot thickens. I've done a bit more printing. It's actually the next day. I had some regular outside work to be done. So I've done some more printing. That setting I mentioned before, minimum travel after retraction in PrusaSlicer, If I look at the explanation for it, it says retraction is not triggered when travel moves are shorter than this length. It was set to 2 millimeter. I changed it to 1 and I got this. And this honestly is no better than this one was. They are the same. And I actually tried setting it to 0 and still I didn't get any difference at all. So then I thought, is it a retraction problem? I mean, what's going on with it? So I printed another one. This is the one I printed where it was 0 here. So this is with it at 1, and this is with it at 0. I didn't really notice any significant improvement. Then I decided to try some other things. So I put it back at 1 since I don't think it's a good idea to leave it at 0, and I changed some of my retraction settings. I moved my retraction amount from 4 to 6 millimeters. I moved my speed from 40 to 60. My de-retraction I slowed from 40 to 30, and I unselected wipe while retracting. And I selected retract on layer change, and then I got this. Is that better? I mean, if it is extremely minimally better, but it might be minimally better. So then I decided, since my problem was I didn't like all that extra white crap around the bottom, here you can see it on this one pretty well, at the bottom of the R, all the extra white filament, I thought maybe if I move up the layer at which it changes color, maybe I could, I mean, it would still be there, that extra filament, extra ooze, whatever it is around the base would still be there, but at least it would be orange and it might not be as noticeable. That's this one. That improved it significantly. And I think that's where my biggest change is going to be. Then I added all my retraction settings in and the layer change up and got this one. And then finally I decided, instead of going up 1 layer before I changed it, because before I was changing the color at the layer next up from the orange base, next up from the flat part as it went into there. So I decided to go up 1 for this, and I decided to go up 2 for this, and I think, you know, it's still, what I don't like is still there, but you just can't see it anymore because now it's orange and not white. And I don't know if you can see it well in here, but you can see the color changing is happening higher. So this is all of my settings. The minimum travel after retraction at 1 instead of 2, and all of my retraction settings and changing the height. And I think, honestly, I think changing the height made the biggest difference. So while I still don't think it's as good as this, I think it's close enough that it makes me happy. Because all that stuff around the base of the lettering that I have to trim off with a razor knife, if I do that with a razor knife, I'm going to get a little bit careless at some point, because this is me we're talking about here, and I'm going to wind up popping one of the letters off, separating the layer, and then I'll wreck the whole thing. So I would rather have this intact than take a chance of trying to get this and ruining the whole part. So I'm going to go with this for now. I think it's actually pretty darn good. If you guys can think of anything better, if you know of some way to negate what the travel moves do that degrades the lettering from this to, where's the other PrusaSlicer one? Where are you? That's SuperSlicer. It's going to be the last one I pick up. That's IdeaMaker. Where'd it go? There it is. So if you know some way to change the travel moves, and that's the one that's too big. Anyway, you guys know what I'm talking about. Some way to fix it so that the travel moves doesn't degrade the lettering, let me know, because I would really like to know. I'd like to be able to get this quality on this without having to change the color higher, even though you can't see it when I do that. So anyway, that's all the insanity I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed my my loss of my mind, And please comment down below and let me know what you think. Please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys the next time, maybe in the shift handle, and maybe I got another product here to test. Maybe for that. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.